The alien invasion was swift, ruthless, and overwhelming. Alien warships dropped from the skies with terrifying precision, unleashing a torrent of destruction upon Earth. The resistance fought back, but they were outmatched by the sheer force of the invaders. The aliens arrived with technology beyond anything humans had ever seen. Their weapons could level entire cities. In an instant, their soldiers were faster, stronger, and smarter than anything humanity could muster. In the chaos of the war, entire nations fell in days. The resistance was forced to retreat, hiding in the shadows as the alien forces spread across the planet. But there was one human who had become a symbol of hope, a sniper known only as Agent Hawk. His shots were legendary, a single bullet capable of eliminating an alien soldier from miles away. He had become the stuff of myth, a human capable of taking down even the most formidable of alien warriors. With nothing but a rifle and his unparalleled skill, Hawk had earned the respect of his comrades and the fear of his enemies. It was said that no one had ever seen him miss his targets, and no alien soldier dared to underestimate the power of a single human with a rifle. Hawk was a symbol of defiance against the alien invaders. He represented everything the resistance stood for: determination, courage, and the refusal to give up no matter how hopeless the odds were. Zira had heard of him in the alien command center. Whispers of the human sniper reached her ears as she prepared for her mission. It was a task that she knew would be simple. She was an elite soldier of her species, a warrior who had faced the best of the galaxy and emerged victorious. There was no human sniper, no matter how skilled, who could possibly defeat her. She was confident in her superiority. Her advanced training, her powerful weapons, her people's technology was far beyond what humans could comprehend. Yet the stories of Hawk lingered in the back of her mind. She had to see for herself just how dangerous this human could be. Zira was a seasoned fighter. She had been trained in the art of war. Since she was a child, her people had conquered countless planets, and her name had become synonymous with victory. Every mission she was given, she completed with ruthless efficiency. She'd have fought in wars against other alien species and emerged victorious. Every time there was no challenge that could stand against her alien strength and intellect. Yet here she was facing a human, a single human, in a war that had already been lost in her mind. The task was beneath her, a mere inconvenience. But something about this human sniper piqued her curiosity. Zira was no fool. She knew that there was no such thing as an easy target, especially when the target had earned the kind of reputation that Hawk had. She was determined to find him and end the threat once and for all. It was a simple mission: find the human sniper, eliminate him, and return to the front lines. But as Zira began her journey to hunt down Agent Hawk, she couldn't shake the strange feeling in her gut that there was more to this human than the stories led her to believe. Her mind raced as she moved through the alien terrain of Earth. Everything felt different. This world was strange to her, nothing like the planets she had conquered before. The human resistance had adapted quickly to the alien invasion, using guerrilla tactics and ambushes to fight back against the overwhelming power of the invaders. Zira knew she had to be careful. This wasn't just any mission, it was a mission that could end her life if she wasn't careful. And in her mind, Hawk was no mere human. He was a threat, something more than she expected. She couldn't help but wonder how this sniper had become so dangerous. How had he gained such skill that even the might of her species was threatened by him? It was only a matter of time before she would find out. Zira moved through the landscape with deadly grace. The alien technology embedded within her armor allowed her to blend into the surroundings. She was a shadow in the night, undetectable to the human eye. Every step calculated, every movement precise. The humans had no idea what was coming their way. Zira knew the human resistance was scattered and outmatched, but there was something about their persistence that made them dangerous. They fought not just for survival, but for something greater, a cause that burned brightly in the hearts of those who resisted the alien forces. Zira's focus remained on the mission: eliminate the sniper, and then return to the front lines. Her mind sharpened on the task ahead. She couldn't allow herself to be distracted by unnecessary thoughts. Hawk was just another human, just another enemy to be dealt with. She'd have faced countless opponents in her career, and none had ever proven to be a true challenge. The stories about Hawk were exaggerated. Surely a human could not be more than an inconvenience to her immense power and skill. She had learned long ago that arrogance was the downfall of every warrior who let it cloud their judgment. But Zira was not arrogant, she was confident in her superiority. But something in her gut told her this mission would not be as simple as it seemed. As Zira neared the coordinates where Hawk was last spotted, she slowed her movements, every sense on high alert. The landscape was eerily quiet. The usual hum of the alien battlefronts seemed to fade away. As if the land itself was holding its breath, she scanned the horizon with the precision of an apex predator. Her alien eyes adjusted to the darkness, allowing her to see what others could not. There were no signs of human activity, no movement in the distance, no faint traces of a sniper's position. Everything was still too still. Her instincts screamed at her to stay alert. She knew Hawk was out there somewhere, hiding, waiting to take the perfect shot. Zira stopped in her tracks and activated her alien sensory devices, scanning for heat signatures and electromagnetic disturbances. The results were inconclusive. Hawk was clever, far too clever, to make his position obvious. Zira cursed under her breath. She had underestimated him. So far, the hunt had been frustrating, and it was beginning to wear on her patience. Hawk had become a ghost, a shadow with no trail to follow. Zira continued her search, her movements quick and calculated as she carefully navigated the terrain. It was then that she felt it, the faintest disturbance in the air, the slightest shift in the wind. It was subtle, but it was enough to make her freeze in place. Hawk was here somewhere nearby. She could feel it. The pressure in the air was thick with anticipation. Zira's hand instinctively moved to the weapon at her side, her fingers brushing the cold surface of her advanced rifle. The weapon, designed for close combat and long-range precision, was the perfect tool for this mission. But Zira knew the real danger wasn't the weapon, it was the sniper, the human who could make a shot from miles away with pinpoint accuracy. The thought made Zira's mind race. If Hawk was as skilled as the stories claimed, then he was more dangerous than any alien soldier she had ever faced. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not this time. She could feel her pulse quicken as she slowly advanced through the terrain. Every step measured, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. It was like walking through a storm cloud, waiting for the first crack of thunder that would signal the inevitable strike. But Hawk remained silent. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, her patience wearing thin. But Zira had been trained for moments like this. She had learned to control her emotions, to suppress fear and doubt. In the face of danger, her mind was a weapon just as deadly as any of her alien technology. And yet, as she moved deeper into the heart of the human camp, she couldn't shake the feeling that Hawk was watching her, studying her movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Zira's movements became even more calculated, her every breath measured. As she navigated the broken landscape, the stillness around her only heightened her senses. As if the world itself was holding its breath, she knew Hawk was out there somewhere, just beyond the edge of her vision. A faint shimmer of movement could be a clue, but it was too faint to identify. She tried to focus, every inch of her being attuned to the smallest detail, the flicker of light, the whisper of wind, the smallest rustle in the brush. But still there was nothing. It was as if Hawk had vanished entirely into the vastness of the lands. Zira's frustration grew. She had dealt with many human soldiers before, and each time their survival had been predictable. They were limited in their approach and their thinking. But Hawk was different. The resistance had not managed to stop her people. By relying on conventional methods they had adapted, they had found a way to fight back, and Hawk was at the center of it. All Zira knew, she couldn't let her guard down for a second. She had already made the mistake of underestimating him once, and she would not do so again. There was a sharp instinct that told her to keep moving. The air felt too heavy with anticipation, too quiet for her liking. Her eyes darted to every corner of the terrain, seeking the slightest sign of the sniper's presence. Suddenly, something in the distance caught her attention, a tiny flash reflecting off a piece of metal so subtle it could easily be missed. But Zira's eyes locked onto it like a hawk to its prey. The glint of light from far away was enough to send her mind into overdrive. She began to close the distance slowly, carefully, making sure she didn't give away her own position to the unseen sniper. The wind had shifted slightly now, and with it came a new scent, a faint trace of human sweat mixed with the dampness of the earth. It was a fleeting scent, barely noticeable, but it was enough to confirm Hawk was nearby. Zira's heartbeat quickened. But she did not allow herself to panic. She was in control. Every movement to liberate, every step, calculated. Her alien strength would be more than enough to overpower any human, especially one hiding in the shadows. She drew her rifle closer to her body, making sure it was within easy reach as she began to circle the area. The moment she took her eyes off the distant glint of light, she felt it. Something shifted in the air. A feeling so sharp it made her freeze in place. Zira's heart raced in her chest, her body instinctively going into defensive mode. But the feeling came and went in an instant. Had she been mistaken? No, the sensation was too real. Hawk was nearby, and he was closing in on her position. Her mind spun with calculations. But before she could fully process her next move, a sudden noise shattered the silence. It was soft, but unmistakable, the quietest of rustles in the grass. It wasn't enough to give away a position, but it was enough to make Zira's body tense, her senses on full alert. The sound came from behind her. She spun around without thinking, aiming her rifle into the dark space where the sound had come from, but the shadows revealed nothing. Zira took a deep breath, refocusing her thoughts. This was no ordinary hunt. Hawk was unlike any human she had ever encountered. Her mind began to work through the possibilities. Was he deliberately drawing her in to make her lose focus? Was he playing a game with her, testing her limits? Zira's skin prickled as she crouched low to the ground, her rifle trained on the space in front of her. She felt the weight of her armor pressing down on her like a second skin. But her mind was sharp, her eyes never strayed from the space before her. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Hawk had become an enigma to her, a puzzle that refused to be solved. No matter how many pieces she collected, she needed to find him and eliminate him. But the longer she searched, the more elusive he became, like smoke slipping through her fingers. As she moved cautiously forward, Zira's instincts screamed at her to stay vigilant. The sniper could be anywhere, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And as she pushed deeper into the wilderness, she felt a strange unease begin to settle within her. The hunt had only just begun, and already she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. Zira's eyes darted back and forth, scanning the horizon. The silence of the wilderness was oppressive. Her heart beat steadily, but each breath felt heavier than the last. She could feel the weight of her armor pressing against her shoulders, every movement more laborious than the last, as if the world around her was growing tighter and tighter. She forced herself to focus on the task ahead, but the uncertainty in the air was palpable. Every whisper of the wind, every flicker of shadow seemed to carry the potential of danger. The land had become a battleground where she was both hunter and prey. The longer she moved, the more she began to sense the shifting energy around her, a presence watching her like a phantom just out of sight. Every step forward seemed to bring her closer to the edge of some invisible precipice. Something was waiting for her to make the wrong move. She crouched low to the ground, carefully calculating each step. She had come so far, and she refused to let this human sniper slip away. She had faced countless warriors across the galaxy. All of them had fallen before her. She was faster. She was stronger. Her reflexes were honed by years of brutal training. And yet there was something about this human that made her uneasy. The idea that someone so simple could be her equal was a concept she struggled to accept. Her mind raced through the many strategies she had used over the years to eliminate enemies. Like Hawk, she could lay traps. She could use her superior technology to track him down. But Hawk was no ordinary human. He knew how to disappear into the shadows, how to stay undetected, how to fight without being seen. Zira's fingers tightened around her rifle as she moved through the dense underbrush. The silence was deafening now. Her every footfall seemed to echo in her ears. She had to find him before he found her. There was no time to waste. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard. She couldn't allow herself to be vulnerable. The sudden crack of a twig underfoot made her freeze. Her eyes narrowed, searching the darkness ahead. She had been too careless. She had made a mistake. She wasn't alone. The sound had come from ahead, from a place where she had already checked. But now she couldn't shake the feeling that the hunter was now a hunted. Something in the air had shifted again, a subtle change that sent a ripple of warning through her senses. She looked up instinctively, scanning the high ground for any sign of movement. It was then she saw it, a flash of light, so faint that it might have been mistaken for a reflection of the stars in the distance. But Zira's trained eyes caught it immediately, the glint of something metallic, a small piece of equipment, Or perhaps a sniper's scope, hidden in the darkness. She didn't hesitate this time, her body moving like lightning, her rifle raised in an instant. She fired into the direction of the glint. The shot rang out sharp and precise, the sound reverberating through the still air. The blast echoed into the distance. But when the smoke cleared, there was no sign of the human, no trace of his presence, no mark to indicate that she had even come close to hitting her target. Zira's breath caught in her throat. Something was wrong. Her instincts were screaming at her she had missed. But she had aimed true. She had been sure that the shot would hit. And yet the human sniper had vanished into thin air. Just like that, Zira cursed under her breath. The hunt had become even more elusive than before. She couldn't afford another mistake. Her eyes searched the ground, her mind replaying every step she had taken in the last few minutes, trying to piece together where she had gone wrong. It was as if Hawk had been one step ahead the entire time, perhaps more than one step. The realization hit her like a jolt of electricity. She had been so focused on tracking him down that she'd have failed to realize the true danger he posed. Hawk wasn't just an exceptional sniper. He was a strategist, a tactician, someone who could make every move with purpose, every action designed to make her question everything she knew about combat. Zira had been so certain of her superiorities, so confident that her technology and training would ensure her victory. But now she was facing a human whose intellect had proven far more dangerous than any weapon Zira had ever used. Zira stood in the silence, her pulse pounding in her ears, a faint echo of her shot still hanging in the air, as if the world itself was waiting for something to happen. But there was nothing at all. The ground was empty, no signs of movement, no footprints left behind. The human had disappeared just as quickly as he had appeared. Her mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. She had seen the glint of his scope. She had aimed and fired with precision. And yet, there was no sign of Hawk, no trace of his presence, as though the earth itself had swallowed him whole. This was no ordinary human. Zira realized, her heart still pounding. She had been so sure that the hunt was nearly over, and now she was left grasping at shadows. She couldn't afford to let fear slip in. She had to keep her mind sharp. She had to find him and end this. But how Hawk had become a ghost slipping between the cracks of reality and leaving no trace of his existence behind. Zira took a deep breath, steadying herself. She could not allow herself to be rattled. She would find him. She would eliminate him as planned. And then she would move on to the next mission. But something in her gut told her that this would not be like the others. The other human soldiers had been predictable, simple to handle. Even when they fought back, they fought in patterns she could anticipate. But Hawk was different. He didn't play by the rules she had come to rely on. He was smart, far smarter than she had ever expected. Zira moved again, this time more cautiously, her every step calculated, every inch of terrain scrutinized. She didn't trust the silence anymore. It felt like a trap, one that Hawk had set for her from the very beginning. She knew he had to be close. By the weight of the air had shifted again. The tiniest change in the environment, a ripple that told her he was watching her. She was no longer the hunter, she was the prey. And she knew it. Hawk was drawing her out. He was testing her, pushing her to make a mistake. Zira's body tensed. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck rising. She scanned the landscape, carefully looking for any movement that might betray his position. Her alien senses, honed by years of battle, felt the smallest disturbances in the air, the breeze that shifted, the faintest vibrations in the earth. But still she saw nothing. She knew he was there, just out of reach. Her mind calculated the angles and distances she could cover, but something in her told her to slow down. Something told her to trust her instincts. The human sniper had already proven that he could outthink her at every turn. She would need more than technology to defeat him. She would need to outsmart him. She would need to become something he couldn't predict. Zira crouched down, her body blending into the terrain like a shadow. She focused every sense on the space around her, trying to make herself invisible to the one enemy who had proven more elusive than any other she had faced. The longer she sat there, the more she began to sense the peculiar stillness of the air. It was almost too quiet, as if the world itself was waiting in anticipation. Zira's breath slowed. She began to piece together the puzzle Hawk had created. He wasn't just hiding, he was making her doubt her every move. He was forcing her to question everything she knew about this hunt. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together slowly, but surely Hawk had not just made himself invisible, he had made her feel a fear of uncertainty, something that Zira had never experienced before in all her years. As a warrior, Zira closed her eyes for a moment and took another slow breath, her mind clearing. As she refocused, she couldn't let him get inside her head. She couldn't afford to become uncertain again. She would play his game, but on her terms she would find him, and when she did, she would make sure the hunt was finally over. Zira opened her eyes and surveyed the area with a new sense of clarity. She had been on the defensive for too long, allowing Hawk to control the rhythm of the hunt. But that would change now. She would no longer allow herself to be a mere target in this twisted game. She would take charge once again. She began to methodically analyze the landscape, each rock, each tree, each shadow. She saw it all as a potential clue, each piece of the environment, offering a chance to outmaneuver the human sniper. Zira could feel the air grow thicker as her senses sharpened. Her alien eyes scanned the terrain with surgical precision. The faintest movement caught her attention, a ripple in the foliage, no more than a fraction of an inch, but enough to give her a glimpse of Hawk's presence. The human was close, but he was still careful, moving like a ghost, blending into the shadows. Zira's heartbeat quickened, her mind already calculating the angle of approach and the best course of action. She knew that Hawk was intelligent. He had proven as much in their silent battle of wits. But Zira had one advantage, that he could never replicate: her ability to remain calm under pressure. She had been trained for moments like this, where everything seemed uncertain. But her composure would always be her strength. She decided to move slowly, testing the waters, just to see if Hawk would make his next move in the game of cat and mouse. She had no intention of rushing into another mistake this time. She would force him to reveal himself first. She took one step at a time, every footfall quiet and deliberate. The wind shifted, slightly brushing against her skin. It brought with it the faint scent of the earth, the dampness of the forest floor, but also something else, something sharper, a human presence, the unmistakable hint of sweat and adrenaline. Hawk was close. Zira's eyes narrowed, and she stopped dead in her tracks, holding her breath. As she listened, the silence stretched on her mind, working through 1,000 possible outcomes. In an instant, she was no longer just reacting to his moves. She was anticipating them. She knew Hawk would be watching her every move, waiting for her to make a mistake. She could feel his gaze. Even though she couldn't see him, she could feel the weight of his presence pushing against her. She steadied herself, knowing that the next moment could be the one where everything changed. She had to be ready for anything. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. It was quiet but distinct, the softest rustle of grass and the faintest shift of movement somewhere to her left. It was barely audible, but Zira's instincts immediately snapped into action. She pivoted to her left, aiming her rifle at the exact spot where she had heard the sound. She could feel her heart beating faster, but her grip on the rifle remained steady, her breath slow and controlled. Zira's eyes scanned the area, but there was nothing, no figure, no glint of metal, no sign of the sniper. It was like Hawk had evaporated into the air once again. She cursed under her breath. The sound had been real. She had heard it. She had been close. But Hawk had once again slipped through her fingers. It was becoming clear to Zira that Hawk was not just a sniper. He was a master of deception. He could blend into the environment better than any other warrior she had ever faced. He wasn't just waiting for her to make the wrong move. He was creating the wrong move for her. She had underestimated him. And now she was starting to feel the weight of her mistake. She was hunting a ghost, a phantom, who was always one step ahead. Zira took a deep breath, trying to refocus her thoughts. She couldn't allow herself to be rattled. She knew that panic would only make her vulnerable, and that was the last thing she could afford now. It was time to play his game and take back control. She would have to think like Hawk. She would have to outsmart him at his own game, and that meant forcing him to make a move first. Zira began to move again, this time with greater purpose. Her steps measured, her rifle held tightly in her hands as she carefully positioned herself in an area that would allow her to cover all possible escape routes. She was no longer going to wait for Hawk to make his move. She was going to make the first move herself, and this time she would make sure she wouldn't miss. Zira moved with renewed confidence. Now every step deliberate, every breath controlled. Her mind was sharp and focused. She was no longer the prey, but the predator in this deadly game of cat and mouse. She knew Hawk was still watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But she wasn't going to give him that opportunity. She would force him to make the first move. She carefully selected her path, making sure to avoid any obvious tracks or disturbances in the terrain. She moved low to the ground, blending into the shadows of the trees and rocks like a spectre. Her rifle held close but ready, her senses on high alert. She knew that Hawk had to be close. By the feel of the air was different now. It was thick with tension, almost as if the entire environment was alive and aware of their struggle. She could feel it, the weight of his presence. Just beyond her sight, her heart beat steadily in her chest. But her mind remained calm, her thoughts clear, as she analyzed every sound, every shift in the wind, every subtle movement in the foliage. She was waiting now, waiting for Hawk to reveal himself. She knew he was clever, too clever to rush in and make a mistake. But she also knew that humans were driven by their emotions and pride. Sooner or later, Hawk would make a move driven by that same pride to prove himself superior. Zara allowed herself a small smile at the thought. She had seen it countless times before, the arrogance that humans carried even in the face of overwhelming odds. She could exploit that. She would exploit that. The silence stretched on Zara's patience, wearing thin. She was so close she could feel it. But Hawk remained hidden. She knew he was testing her too. The longer she waited, the more the stakes increased for both of them. He was pushing her to make a mistake. She wouldn't let him do that. She could feel a slight shift in the air again, a subtle disturbance that could have been missed by anyone who wasn't paying attention. It was a faint ripple in the environment, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make her heart race. It wasn't much, but it was all Zara needed to know that Hawk was still there somewhere, just out of sight. Her fingers tightened on the rifle as she moved with purpose to the source of the disturbance. She kept low, her body blending with the surroundings as she crept forward inch by inch like a shadow slipping through the night. Her mind ran through every possible scenario, calculating the best angle of attack. She was closing in on him now. But she had to be careful. She couldn't let him catch her off guard. She had to remain in control. Her eyes darted from side to side, scanning every inch of the terrain, her instincts screaming at her to stay alert. She was close. She could feel it. Hawk was near. But where he was hiding remained a mystery. Zara's muscles tensed as she approached the next corner of the landscape, where she could sense Hawk's presence most strongly. It was coming from the ridge ahead, a small outcropping of rocks, where she knew the human sniper could easily hide. She had seen it in the data provided to her by her commanders. It was the perfect position to take a shot. But she wouldn't let him have it. She would force him out of hiding. She would make sure he couldn't get the jump on her again. She took a deep breath and made her move. Just as she approached the rocks, she slid into a crouch and peeked around the edge. But there was nothing, not a single sign of movement. Zara's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes narrowed. The calm before the storm was unsettling. She moved faster, now her rifle raised, ready to fire. But still there was no sign of Hawk. Her mind raced. Had he already moved? Or was he simply biding his time, waiting for her to slip up? She couldn't afford to wait any longer. Zara was losing the advantage. She needed to act now. Before Hawk struck first, she decided to take a risk. She pulled a small device from her belt and activated it. It was a signal disruptor designed to scramble any equipment in the area to prevent Hawk from using his technology to track her position. She activated it, and the air seemed to hum with energy. For a brief moment, Zara held her breath, waiting for the reaction from the other side. Would Hawk reveal himself, or would he stay hidden and bide his time? Zara wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for certain: this game of theirs was reaching its climax. The next move would decide it all. The moment Zara activated the disruptor, the air around her seemed to crackle with tension. The atmosphere shifted, as if the very ground she stood on held its breath. For a fleeting second, there was silence. But then it broke the stillness like a knife cutting through the quiet. A soft clicking sound, barely audible, but unmistakable. Zara's instincts flared. She knew the moment had arrived. Hawk had taken the bait. He was closing in. She didn't hesitate. Her rifle now aimed in the direction of the sound, her senses screaming at her that he was near. But the sniper was different from any enemy she had faced before. He wasn't moving in a predictable pattern. No simple approach this time. No, he was adapting, too shifting, like water in her hands, making it almost impossible to track him. Zara's mind raced. She couldn't allow him to slip away again. She had been outplayed once, But she wouldn't let it happen again. She moved quickly, her body flowing through the underbrush, her feet light. As she stayed low to the ground, her eyes scanning every inch of the terrain ahead, every shadow, every shift in the wind, a predator waiting to pounce. But Zira knew Hawk had already anticipated her movements. He had been leading her here. All along, this was his plan. This was his game. And now Zira was playing right into it. But she couldn't stop now. She had come too far, and there was no turning back. She pushed forward, her body tense with readiness. She could feel the sweat trickling down her neck, her mind still calculating her every move. But even as she moved in on what she thought was his position, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that Hawk had already anticipated her next step. She felt it again, that familiar prickling sensation at the back of her neck. A feeling she couldn't ignore. She froze, her body becoming a statue, her senses on high alert, waiting for the inevitable strike. She knew it was coming. Hawk wouldn't make the same mistake again. He would wait for the right moment and then strike with precision. Zira's fingers tightened on her rifle, ready for anything, but nothing came. The silence stretched on. But something was wrong. The air was different this time. It wasn't just tension, it was something else, a kind of stillness that felt unnatural. Zira could feel her heartbeat in her chest, louder now, every beat more pronounced than the last. She slowly turned her head, scanning the perimeter. But there was nothing, no movement, no signs of Hawk. She cursed under her breath. There was something she was missing, something she couldn't see. She had been so focused on tracking Hawk, she had failed to consider the possibility that he had already outsmarted her again. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He wasn't relying on technology or camouflage. No, Hawk had been waiting for her to come to him. He had led her directly into a trap. Zira felt the shift in the air too late. Before she could react, before she could raise her rifle to defend herself, a sudden explosion of noise shattered the silence, a sound of gunfire. So close it felt like a shockwave hitting her body. Zira instinctively dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the first shot that came at her, but she could feel the heat of it brushing against her armor. She wasn't fast enough. The second shot was already in the air. She'd heard the whiz of the bullet before she could react, but instead of striking her, it ricocheted off a nearby rock and missed by inches. She didn't pause, she didn't think, she just moved, her body rolling to her feet. In an instant, her rifle raised and aimed in the direction of the shots. She couldn't see him, but she knew Hawk was somewhere in the distance, still keeping his distance, making her work for every inch of ground. Zira's mind raced. She couldn't afford to be outplayed again. She would not let him win. She would not allow herself to become just another casualty of his perfect shots. She began to move again, this time faster, with more purpose. She couldn't waste any time. She needed to force him to make a mistake. Hawk had made his move now. It was time for Zira to make hers. She would turn the tables on him. She would be the one to control the pace of the game. It was all coming down to this, the final confrontation, and Zira was determined to come out on top. Her heart raced, but her mind remained focused. She wasn't going to let Hawk slip away this time, not when she was so close. Zira's heart pounded in her chest as she pressed forward, the sounds of the gunfire still echoing in her mind. She had to find him. She couldn't allow this moment to slip through her fingers. Hawk had made his move, and now Zira was determined to finish it. She moved with purpose, every footstep calculated and careful. She couldn't afford to make a single mistake. She scanned the horizon. Every rock, every tree, every crevice was a potential hiding spot. Hawk had to be close. He was playing with her, now toying with her emotions, making her doubt her every move. But Zira wasn't about to let him get the better of her again. She had been in worse situations. She had faced down enemies far more dangerous than Hawk. But what made this fight different was his mind, the way he could predict her every move before she even made it. Zira could feel the pressure building. She knew that time was running out. If she didn't act soon, she would lose him again. Hawk had the advantage of patience, and he was using it against her. He knew exactly how to make her feel vulnerable. And now Zira was fighting against not only his skill, but her own fear of failure. She pushed it all down, the fear, the doubt, the exhaustion. She couldn't let any of it control her. She was trained to handle situations like this, trained to stay calm. When everything around her was falling apart, the air felt heavier. Now the stillness of the surroundings unnerving. Zira felt as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move to unfold. She could sense the presence of Hawk, But he remained elusive, just out of her reach. She knew he was there. She could feel him watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But Zero wouldn't allow him. That she had learned from her past mistakes. She would not give him the satisfaction of getting inside her head this time. Zero moved again, slowly and cautiously, her rifle held steady in her hands, her eyes scanning every inch of the terrain. She was getting closer. She could feel it. Every instinct screamed that Hawk was near. But still, there was nothing. The silence stretched on the world around her, still and quiet. She felt the tension rise inside her like a spring ready to snap at any moment. But she knew better than to rush. She couldn't afford to let him outsmart her again. Zero's breath was steady now, each inhalation deep and controlled as she moved forward, her mind working through all the possibilities. Hawk could be anywhere, behind a rock, in a tree, even underground. He had proven time and time again that he could hide in plain sight. He could make the impossible seem simple. Zero knew that she needed to anticipate him, think like him, and find a way to turn the tables before it was too late. Then suddenly, she saw it, a flash of movement, barely perceptible, a shadow shifting against the trees. Zero's eyes locked on it instinctively, her finger tightening on the trigger. But she didn't fire, not yet, not until she was sure. She took another step forward. And then it happened. She saw the glint of metal, a fraction of a second too late. Hawk had already made his move. He was quicker than she had anticipated, faster than she had expected. The shot rang out. Zero barely had time to react. The bullet whizzed past her ear, so close she could feel the heat from it. Her instincts kicked in, and she dropped to the ground, rolling to the side, her rifle aimed. But Hawk was already gone. He had vanished into the trees once again. Zero cursed under her breath. She couldn't afford to make another mistake. Hawk had proved time and time again that he could outthink her, outmaneuver her. And now she was fighting against time itself. But Zero was no stranger to pressure. She had faced down impossible odds before and come out victorious. This would be no different. She wasn't going to let Hawk win. She wasn't going to let him outsmart her again. She pushed herself up from the ground, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She was more focused than ever. She could feel Hawk's presence again. He was close, just out of sight. But this time, Zero wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of making the first move. This time, it would be her. She moved again, carefully stalking through the trees, her rifle aimed and ready. This time, Zero knew that the next move would be the last, the final confrontation, where only one would walk away. The game had come to its climax, and Zero was ready for whatever came next.